when it comes to filmmaking gear, a lot of people like to say, I don't care about filmmaking gear at all. I just completely focus on the story. Now, I personally don't think that's all there is to the argument, so that's what this video is going to be about, discussing what gear does for your films and what gear, more importantly, doesn't do for your films. Hello, my name is Simon Cade and this is DSLR Guide. So the first thing I want to say on this topic is that gear is important, but I think many of the roots of the problems with a lot of films is that we put too much emphasis on the equipment. So I'm going to give some examples of things that gear can do for your films and things that can't do for your films. So that can be the first little section of this video. So the first thing is that gear can make your videos look sharper, have less grain to them, or it could make them have a nicer overall image due to the lighting, or it could make them sound better. But all of these things that most people are probably not going to notice, but there will be a few people who can appreciate it and go, yeah, that film looks really good, sounds really good. Now, I believe that anyone with even the most basic camera, lighting and audio equipment, even on a really small budget, I believe that anyone can make something that is good enough quality to be played in a cinema, but I will talk about that more later in the video. So another thing that better equipment can allow you to do is to pull off certain types of shots or certain types of things that you couldn't do before. So let's say you have a camera that doesn't have slow motion, well obviously you're not going to be able to do any slow motion shots compared to a camera that does. The next one is probably the most important one, and that is efficiency. So this is when you have a really good setup to the point where you can work really quickly and the gear doesn't get in your way. You're not trying to fiddle with something that's breaking, you're not trying to work out how something works, it all works very simply and you understand how it works to the point where you can be very efficient and you can just completely focus on the story. I think the best gear is gear that just gets out of your way and allows you to focus on the film. So for example, someone who uses ND filters that screw onto the front of the lens, they might be messing with those trying to switch lenses and something really important happens, say if you're filming a wedding, and they might have missed a really important shot that someone who had built-in ND filters on the camera, they would have got. So it's little things like this that can actually make a big difference. And lastly, better gear does look more professional if you're trying to impress a client. So let's say you turned up when you're being paid to film something, if you turned up with just a small point of shoot camera or your phone, they might be a little bit disappointed. But I would say generally, for the most part, by the time the clients actually care about what kind of equipment you're using, is by the time they're paying you enough that you can easily afford the pro equipment. So I really don't think this is one to worry about too much. So hopefully what you'll have noticed from that list is that equipment only really affects a very small percentage of the film. The other 99% is your script, your actors, your locations, and of course the people who are actually behind that equipment. So I really do think it's important that we remember that yes, gear can help, but the best things to invest money and time into are the things which don't require equipment, things like the script, things like working with the actors, and those are the things which really can make a much better film in the end. But even for the things that gear can do, there's pretty much always a workaround. So let's say you want to have a dolly shot in your film where the camera's moving either from left to right or forward and backwards, and all you have to do in that case is, I would say, check out the video by Film Riot, which shows you how to do dolly shots using just things from your house. So I'll put a link in the description and on the blog post to where you can find that. But then the alternative is to just say, well, you know what, maybe we just won't have a dolly shot. And there may be lots and lots of occasions where actually that makes your film better by not having a dolly shot, just keeping it simple. And through working around and writing your script so that it fits around the equipment that you have, you really don't need to have all of the high-end equipment to make a good film. Now, I totally understand that everyone has a limit in terms of how much money they're going to spend on their filmmaking equipment, and I also think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with spending some time choosing the right equipment and looking into it, researching it, so that you don't have to spend all of your budget on one thing. You know, being smart about what you buy is a very good idea, I think, but I would say that you have to be careful about how much time you spend doing that. If you're spending more time researching equipment than you are actually making films, then I think there's obviously something, a little bit of an imbalance there that you might want to look at. So I'd say a good guideline for this is to just keep note, and I think we all need to do this, just notice how much time we're spending looking at equipment, and then also just to only look into equipment that you're actually going to be purchasing pretty soon. I don't think there's any point in looking into really expensive cameras that you're not going to get anytime soon, at least. Now don't get me wrong, I do enjoy equipment and it's really exciting when you get a new piece of gear in the mail, and I don't think we have to be ashamed of that or try and pretend that all we care about is story. But I do think that if you start thinking things like, oh, I'm going to make my next film but I'll just wait until I get a new camera or a new lens, or if you start thinking that doing research on equipment counts as helping your career, then I do think you've got things a little bit off and you just might want to reconsider the way you're thinking and just kind of get out there and make films, because at the end of the day that is the main thing that's going to help your career most if you want to be a filmmaker. So I often hear people saying, isn't it amazing that equipment is so cheap these days? The gap between professional and consumer really is closing. And I think this is totally true. You can buy a very inexpensive camera and you can make a full film on it without needing to go through a studio like you used to if you wanted to be a filmmaker, say 50 years ago. But I think that as gear gets cheaper, a lot of people see that and they just think, well, cool, I can have more equipment then. But you know, when the 5D Mark II came out, people were saying, finally, a camera that most people can afford will now be able to shoot feature-length movies, films that are good enough to be put on a big screen. But you see now, if you ask people about the 5D Mark II, they'll say, oh, the image is too soft. 1080p doesn't work on a 60-foot screen. And they'll say that they don't like to work in 8-bit colour because it just falls apart too much. And you know what, the thing is, it's the same camera it used to be. The only thing that's changed is people's expectations. Now, I do think that with some decent lighting and a good crew behind it, the 5D would look very good on a big screen, but you know, even that is missing the point. And I think the main point is that if you don't have a good story, it won't matter if you shot on an Alexa, a 5D, or a webcam. And if it does have a good story, guess what? It doesn't matter whether you shot on Alexa, a 5D, or a webcam. So my challenge to you is to ignore the consumer mindset that our society has got pretty obsessed with, and to just say, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of these cheap cameras and I'm going to put all of the rest of my budget into things that make a better story, into your actors, hiring locations, even maybe hiring a writer if you're not a great writer, and just take any money that you do have and put it directly into the story and see how much of a better film it will be in the end. So let's say you're saving up for a $2,000 camera. Imagine what would happen if you took all of that money and put it directly into the story. Imagine what kind of film that would make. I'd like to leave you with this quote from Robert Rodriguez, which is, what you've learned is something no one else has: how to make movies dirt cheap. No one else in Hollywood knows how to do this. So that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time.